Morning, good morning. All right, let's see here. Open. Sugar. Sec. Okay, so I think we're just about ready to go. Okay, so we're up to the last page, I believe, of this packet of this PDF. Um, okay, so the last tshuva that we did was pretty straightforward. Um, Collecting tzedakah when you have money in the bank but you have no access to it still qualifies you as an ani, and therefore me'ikr hadin, you don't have to return the money. But amidas chasidus, an act of piety, would require you to do so. Okay. Next, asiyat kinyan chalipin be'et. Doing a kinyan chalipin with a pen. Now, what is a kinyan chalipin? It is a method of transfer of rights or ownership from one party to another that the Torah, based on what our Chazal teach us, is an effective method of transfer. And basically what you do is you can take any object, it doesn't even have to be worth a shava pruta, it can be of trifling value, and you give it to the person it's basically called consideration, I think, in legalese. It's as long as you provide someone with anything, an object which demonstrates that there's an exchange taking place. So let's say, for example, I want to commit myself to the terms of a contract. So I go to the person who I'm making a contract with. If he gives me any kind of item, I pick up that item, and that constitutes the exchange. In exchange for the item that he's giving me, I am committing myself to the terms of the contract. So that's standard, the way that a Kinyan Chalipim works. If you want to do a land purchase, you can do a land purchase usually with Chalipim, which basically means that the seller um, uh, takes an item from the buyer. The buyer gives him, let's say, a handkerchief. He lifts up the handkerchief and says, in so doing, I transfer the ownership of my land over to you. And that's called the Kinyan Chalipin in Karka. Now, let's see what items. The question is, can you use a pen for the purposes of Chalipin, which is done all the time? Mm-hmm. The question is there anything wrong with it? Or is there something less than preferable about it? We do that at weddings all the time. You can see the Masader Kedushin does that, right? So the question is as follows: Hitchatanti b'shavua she'avar. I got married last week. So all of a sudden, so this guy thinks he's a big knocker. He just got married. He's probably all of 22 years old. The harab shesider kedushin ratza laso kinyan sheosin b'kriyat haktuva. So the Rav, who was the Masader Kedushin, wanted to do a kinyan chalipin, that we make when we read the ketubah. V'lo haitalo mitpachat. He had no kerchief. So he took out the pen that he was using to write the ketubah. He told me, take a hold of this, lift it up so that you can acquire it. And that way, you indebt yourself to the terms of the ketubah. A number of Talmidei Chachamim came over to me afterwards. Of course, these are your from friends, like we learned in the Smichas Chaver program. If anyone's been at the SCP. This is the frum friend, so to speak, who tells you you're doing something wrong. Ha'im divreihem nechonim, are they correct? So why would that be a problem? So Hagemara omeret bebava mitzia. So first of all, let's get some of the background. The Gemara teaches us in Bava Metzia, al hapasuk shenemar bo Megillas Rus. There's a pasuk in Megillat Rut, which states as follows: V'zot lifnim Yisrael al hageula ve'al hatimura lekayim kol davar. This was an ancient practice within Israel already in the times of Ruth, that if you wanted to redeem something or if you wanted to exchange something, to create a sense of legal exchange, sholaf ish na'alo, then a person would take off his shoe, v'natan l're'eu, he would give the shoe to his friend. It was temporary, obviously, because you're not going to let the guy walk off with your shoe. V'zot ha'te'uda b'Yisrael, and this was the notification within Israel that an exchange or a kinyan had been made. B'darshu rabotenu sham geula zu mechira, and our rabbis teach us that the word redemption in that pasuk refers to sale. V'chein hu omer lo yigael, and it says the term geula refers to purchase because this is the way it's used in the Torah when it talks about houses that are sold and they don't go back in. There's a limitation on within a certain amount of time within the Yovel year, you're not allowed to sell. It says lo yigael, it may not be redeemed. Redeemed means sold. And tamura zu chalipin, and the word tamura refers to an exchange of chalipin, this method that we talked about. V'chein ha'u omer lo yachlifenu v'lo yamiroto. And you see from the language of the pasuk, that's what the word tamura means, to exchange something. V'katvu ha'tosvos sham sheshlosha kinyanim yesh kan. And so Tosfos explains that based on the verbiage of the Gemara, there are three different kinds of kinyanim that are described in this pasuk. Al hageula medaber al mechira regila shel metaltalin sheniknim mishicha. The term geula, which means a sale, is a straight sale where the exchange or the transaction, that's the word I was looking for, the transaction occurs through taking possession of the chattel that is being sold. So Mashicha, what does that mean, Mashicha? I want to purchase your cow. How do I purchase your cow? I take the rope that it has around its neck. I pull the rope and I pull the animal towards me. That's a demonstration of a transaction. Okay, that's one method of transaction when you want to acquire chattel. Al hatamura medaber al kinyan chalipin shel chayfetz b'chayfetz shava b'shava. An exchange transaction is that I take an item in consideration of my selling you another item in its place. Okay, and l'kayem kol davar, the last language of the pasuk was to establish any matter. This refers to a kinyan chalipin, where the item of consideration is not equivalent to the value of the item that's being exchanged. Kagon shemachlif suder b'chefetz yakar. So, for example, if a person is taking hold of a handkerchief and relinquishing a very valuable item, that too works. In other words, if you take a look at the Makor Baruch, he explains, Rotzolomar diyesh sugim shel kinyan chalipin. There are two types of chalipin. Echad shemachlifin hamakne rather v'hakona devarim she'im ba'oto hashivoy. One type of chalipin is where there's an exchange, a straight barter of between two people of two different items. I'm going to give you my dozen eggs in exchange for your loaf of bread. Let's say they cost the same in the market. So therefore, that's a fair barter of, let's say, $3 for $3, and now it's a deal. V'sug acher shel chalipin, but there's a second type of chalipin where the two items are not equivalent in value. Shemachlifin afilu chayfetz yakar b'machat o sudar uchedome. That I will take a hold of a needle or of a handkerchief, and in exchange, you get my car, okay? V'chidshu hatois v'sham she'afal pi deledidan lo mahani chalipin le'inyan peirot. Now, even though normally chalipin doesn't help to purchase produce, as is explained in the Shulchan Aruch, mikol makom bechalipin shava b'shava mahani bepeirot. But when it comes to a chalipin of where there's an equivalent swap, meaning a barter, then as long as the owner of the produce takes possession of an item of equivalent value, then the transaction on the produce is consummated. Virak besug hasheni shel chalipin shel enu shava b'shava oz lamahani bepeirot v'chayot sebo. And Tosfos's point is that when the barter items are not equivalent in value, you cannot use the chalipin method for produce. I don't know what produce means specifically here, whether it's talking about all metaltalin or whether it's specifically talking about produce. I'm not sure. Amnam b'sefer ha'iter kasav shagam b'machlif shava b'shava lo mahani b'peri v'ayin Rama shehevi es hamachlokes hazos. So the Rama brings this machlokes. We'll hold it here in the footnote. Let's continue onwards.
One basic question about chalipin, which I don't really understand.
Yeah.
One doesn't keep the item; they lift it.
Well, that's what we're going to discover.
Oh, okay.
That's what we want to discover further.
I've always been a bit perplexed.
Yeah, right. So the efshir lasos kinyan chalipin b'chol chayfetz, you can make a kinyan chalipin with any item. In other words, the item that is being picked up by the seller, okay, and he's taking that as consideration and therefore transacting the item that is being sold, doesn't even have to be shava pruta, doesn't even have to be worth a minimal amount of money. Uvitanai shiya kli, but provided that it's a kli, it has to be a utensil. Ki kasuf behemshech hapasak sham v'shalaf ish na'alo, that a person would take off his shoe, v'natan l're'ehu, and he would give it to his friend, l'kayem kol davar, to fulfill any matter. Let me just make sure that my screen is being shared properly.
Looks like it is.
Okay. Klomar, Adam shirotze liknot mechaveiro kol davar shehu, bein metaltalin, bein mekarkein. That means to say that if a person wishes to acquire from his friend any item, whether it's chattel or whether it's real estate, v'hachefetz o hakarka lo nimtza kan, and the item that is being transacted, that is being transferred from one party to the other, is not currently present, v'rotzim ligmor ha'iska, but they want to complete or consummate the transaction, hakona yiten klio mitvachas lamakna, the purchaser should give a handkerchief or any other utensil to the seller, v'hu yaknelo hachefet shelo tumurat hakli o mitvachat shehu noten lo. And he thereby, the purchaser thereby acquires the item that is being transacted, okay, in exchange for the utensil or the handkerchief. And once the seller picks up or takes hold of or draws to himself the kli in question, niknu hametaltalin o hamakarkein b'chol makom shenimsaim v'lo yicholim lihitcharet. Then the sale is final. The buyer acquires the chattel or the real estate anywhere that they presently are resting. Even if, let's say, I'm purchasing from you a silo of grain and there's a ballistic missile that's about to land on top of that silo, it makes no difference. Once the kinyan is done, the kinyan is done, and I'm now the owner. Now, the cost of Harambam, shemilvad ma'aseh hakinyan, tzorich hakoineh gam lahagid lamocher, that the Rambam writes that in addition to just taking hold of the handkerchief, the purchaser has to tell the seller, tikneh et hamitpachat o et hakli temurat hadira. He says, take possession of the handkerchief or the utensil in exchange for the domicile shata mocherli that you are selling to me, o b'makom hamechonit shata mocherli, or in exchange for the car that you're selling me. Omnam hatur kasav deka'es lo nohagin lahagid lo kain. But the Torah writes that our minig is not to do that nowadays. Ki mistama al dazehu noten lo she yikne et hamitpachat v'yakne lo et hamechonit o hadira shu koneh. Because it's assumed that that's what's taking place. In other words, there's no necessity to specify that verbally if it's implicitly understood that that is what is taking place. So I actually do that anyway. I do tell people, make this handkerchief yours or make this pen yours in exchange for in exchange for the commitment to the terms of the contract. But the Torah says it's not necessary, and that's how the Rama paskins.
You get your pen back?
That's what we're going to find out. Va'afilu imlo noten lo et hasudar b'matana gemura, ela b'matana al menat lahachzir, and even though you're not giving the utensil to the seller so that it becomes permanently his, but you rather only give it to him temporarily, what's called a matana al menas lahachzir, that it's yours on the condition that you return it back to me in 10 seconds from now. Mikol makom hakinyan chal. Nonetheless, the kinyan is transacted. The transaction is consummated. And he writes, where does this come from? He says, Kain kosav hatur. The kosav habeis Yosef sham shezemi divrei harambam. It's from the Rambam. The kosav harav hamagid sham shekain kosav bala iter b'shem hagaonim upashadu v'chein pasag maran b'shulchan aruch. He says this is all paskend in Shulchan Aruch, and it's based on the principle that a temporary acquisition of something is sufficient to cause this transaction to transpire. Amnam le'inyan liknos matana al menas lahachzer b'kinyan chalipin. Okay, that's something else. We're not going to get into that now. Okay.
The same idea would be lended lulav to somebody else, no?
On the condition.
It's on the condition that he return it, yeah. And so
That's
it's his temporarily while he's shaking the lulav, but then he gives it back, yeah. Now,
But Rabbi, isn't the consideration the money you're using to purchase whatever item? But why are you buying land? You're paying. So why is that not the consideration?
there are certain, first of all, the money may not be present, but we still want to make the transaction. My money's in the bank, and here's the check, but that's not a transaction yet. There are other situations where the rabbis don't allow transactions to take place through cash, and so therefore you have to use another method. The reason why the Chazal did not permit certain transactions like chattel to take place through cash is because what happens if the grain that I'm selling you burns down, right? Gets hit by a ballistic missile, right? So in other words, that was the reason why Chazal made this takana. They either want you to take physical acquisition of the chattel, or they want you to do some kind of bypass transaction, which shows that despite the risk that you're taking because you're not with the chattel right now, you still want to take possession of it. V'yatera mizu, sure, im hamocher lo tafas b'chol hamitpachat, ela rak b'mitksato, v'nishar miktsato b'yad hakoneh, will go even further. He says, even if the seller does not take hold of the entire kli, the entire handkerchief, let's say a portion of the handkerchief is still in the hand of the buyer, or of the, let's say, the Masader Kiddushin, because he's the one that's representing the Kala's side and taking the terms of the ketubah, which is what the chassan is indebting himself to when he makes this kinyan. Even if the buyer is still holding a portion of the handkerchief and the seller only picks up a portion of the handkerchief, im hamocher tafas l'chol hapachos shir shel shalosh etzbaos al shalosh etzbaos ma'mitpachat, as long as he's holding 3 fingers by 3 fingers. 3 fingers means like the width of three fingers, and it's so 3 fingers width, 3 fingers length, and then that's enough. Hakinyan chal ve'ein echad mehem yachol lachzor bo. That's a binding kinyan, and neither party is able to retract. Okay, so that's also paskind in Shulchan Aruch. The hatam shetzarach litvos shir shalosh etzbos hu ki hagemara merit b'bava mitzia, and the reason why you have to take a grasp a hold of at least 3 fingers by 3 fingers is because the Gemara states in Bava Metzia, Amar Rav Misharshia Sudra Kaman de Pasik Dami, that Rav Misharshia says that a kerchief is like a pasik. Now, what does that mean? Usually, pasik means that it's completed or completely severed. Klomar kevin shebekinyan chalipin tzarich kliu mitpachat pachot migimel etzbos eina kli ve'eina mekabel etuma. The answer is that anything that's less than 3 fingers by 3 fingers, if we're talking about a piece of fabric, it's not considered a kli. Lachein im tafas rak chelek ma'mitpachat zeh nechshav kilu hu chatach ota v'yesh bashir kli. And therefore, by taking hold of a 3 by 3 portion of the handkerchief, we look at it as if it's already severed from the portion that the buyer is holding on to. And it's as if you've taken hold of a full kli in your hands. So that's the principle. Okay, now if we go a little bit further, Omnam svarazu shayechet davka b'mitfachat she'efshar lachtochota, but that's only true that it works with a handkerchief that can be severed and can be cut into pieces. Oz shayach lomar shebeshir shel shalosh etzbaos yeshir kli. Then you could say that the 3 by 3 fingers that you're grasping while the other party is still holding on to it is considered to be taking hold of a full kli. Aval be'et hareim tachtochet mashu tofes biyado zehi yeshever kli umemela yesh litzadei sha'akinin lo yitvos. Here's the problem with a pen. If the Masader Kedushin is still holding on to the pen while you take a hold of the other part of the pen, so how do we view that as you're holding a full kli? It has to be severable. The 2 halves have to be severable, but a half a pen is not a kli. A half a handkerchief is a kli as long as there's 3 by 3 fingers width and length, as long as it's 3 by 3. So I can take a hold of the handkerchief while the Masader Kiddushin is holding the other end of the handkerchief, and I've considered to be taking hold of a kli and making the kinyan. But if the Masader Kiddushin is holding the pen, and I'm holding the pen, and we lift it up at the same time, that won't work. Okay, that's the problem, because it's like I'm holding half of a pen, and half of a pen is not a kli. V'lachein, and therefore, le'inyan kinyan chalipin be'et, and therefore, we're not saying that you can't use a pen to do a kinyan chalipin, but what we are saying is, im ha-Masader Kiddushin natan lo et kol ha'et, if the Masader Kiddushin fully gives you the pen, he says, lift up the pen, and he's not touching it anymore. Azai ha'et hu kli v'hakinyan tofes. So then it works, because you've picked up a kli, you've taken possession of a kli, at least temporarily. Aval im hanotein machzik b'chatzi ha'et v'hachatan machzik b'chatzi ha'et ha'sheni kamo shemachzikim b'sudar. But if you're going to do it the way that many people do with the handkerchief, is that both the Masader Kiddushin and the Chatan are holding the handkerchief at the same time. If you're going to do the same type of method with a pen, ein kan kli, there's no kli here. Ki im nachtoch oto hu yeshever kli v'al kein hakinin lo tofes. Then it's not going to work, because the chassan's only holding half a pen, and a half a pen is not a kli. That's the principle. That's the difference between a handkerchief and a pen. It's not that a pen won't work. It's that if you're going to use a pen, you must make sure that the chassan is going to be holding it exclusively without the Masader Kiddushin holding on to it. Now,
So if it's not done properly, they're not married, or what's the problem?
it's not a legal kinyan, and if it's not a legal kinyan, they're married but without a ketubah. And you're not allowed to be married. Rabbinically, you're not allowed to be married without a ketubah. You're not allowed to be intimate with your wife if she doesn't have her ketubah. So they're sort of living in sin. They're still married technically, but they don't have a ketubah.
What's the practice?
You know, honestly, I have a drawer in my bedroom that has handkerchiefs in it. And when I try always to remember to bring a handkerchief with, I don't use handkerchiefs. My father used handkerchiefs.
That was
I,
the generation.
yeah, I don't use, I've never used a handkerchief, right? I have tissues in my pocket, right? But I always try to take a handkerchief with me to when I remember to take it to the wedding with me. But occasionally I forget. And when I forget, I use a pen.
Yeah.
The thing you have to make sure though is, and this is another important issue with a pen, you got to make sure it's a working pen. Because if it's not a working pen, it's not it may not qualify as a kli. Because if it has no utility, then it may not work. Now, I'm not saying it definitely doesn't work, because you could say, well, it's still a working pen. You just need a new cartridge.
Yeah.
You just need to, but it's
It has value.
it still might qualify as a kli if you just replace the inner part. So it's still technically a kli, even though it's not a working pen. So anyway,
You
so
just have to remember to let go.
I equivocate about that. But the thing about letting go, I always let go, right? As a rabbi, you have to learn.
You
This
have to know when
is
to let
it's
go.
just like being a parent. You got to know when to let go. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Okay.
I'm trying to
Now,
understand what a kli is. I always thought it was something that could hold something.
no, a kli is a utensil. Anything that has utility.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, there's something called a kli kibul. A kli kibul is a kli with a receptacle,
Like a bowl or something.
like a bowl. It has to be concave, and that has certain ramifications in the laws of tumah,
Mm.
right? But
I
a
think I should
kli
remember.
could be a kli without being concave. Okay.
That's why I think handkerchief.
Okay, there you go. Now, in the footnote, he says, Re'eh b'sefer Mishmar Halevi laharav Hagon Menachem Mendel Schulsinger, sheherich lachshosh she'i efshar laso kinin chalipin be'et. He writes, he has this concern that you cannot use a pen, kevin sheha'et lo ra'ui lekabel tuma, because a pen cannot become tameh. V'zel pi mashakasav sham shekimedumalo de b'shut be'er Yitzchak mevor de bo'inen kli haroi lekabel tuma ayin sham. That because he says that it seems from another tshuva in the be'er Yitzchak that the kli that you use for chalipin has to be subject to becoming tameh, and perhaps because this kli is plastic or whatever, it's not subject to becoming tameh. That's really a very far out argument. Amnam hama'ayin be'er Yitzchak sham yira she'ochiach kol batar ipcha delo ba'inin kli haroi lekabel tuma. But if you look at that tshuva that he's citing, you'll see just the opposite, that he concludes that it doesn't have to be makabel tuma. Ela sheyeh shem kli chashuv alav, but it has to be considered to be a significant kli. It can't be like a trifling thing, like a bobby pin. Uvesof hatshuva kosav da'avsha hakesef mishnah kosav b'zeh halashon. Inami delo mikri kli le'inyan chalipin aladavar shehu kli le'inyan tuma v'tahara v'chol shar dvarim peri mikri. It's not considered to be a kli for chalipin unless it's something that is a kli that can become tameh, and in all other respects it's a kli. Muchach mikol masha bi'er b'tshuvaso sham shekavanas hakesef mishnah lavdavka ela deboinu rak sheyashem kli alav. It doesn't mean that it literally has to be capable of becoming tameh, but rather it just has to have the appellation of a kli, of a utility item. Ve'imhu kli le'inyan tuma zesimin shu kli kasher lasus chalipin ayin sham. It's just that if it's capable of becoming tameh, that's a sign that it's a kli. But let's say it's made out of plastic, and plastic is not makabel tuma. It's still a kli if it has a utility. And therefore, it's totally fine to use a pen. Okay, that's the bottom line. So those frum friends, those Talmidei Chachamim, who were claring because they have nothing better to do with their lives, right? It's going back to that bottle of fruit drink, that commercial, right? Did you all see the commercial? There's this fruit punch in Israel where the fruit punch was saying 20% more, special for the same price. Now, that was like a way to attract customers. So the scene of the commercial is, guy knocks on his neighbor's door and says, I wanted to return to you the fruit punch. So this one is not 20% more, but it says it's the same volume, but it's 20% more juice in the drink. And the guy says, I know, he says, I'm returning this item. You lent me a bottle of punch last week. I'm returning this punch this week. And he says, it's ribis. I can't accept it because you're giving me an item that is clearly of better value. But he said, no, but it's the same price. It's equivalent in exactly the same price. But no, but it's better quality. So I can't take it. It's ribis. And so they go to the rabbi, this 60-second commercial. They go to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, we have to think about this. And then they go into the base medrash, and then the next scene is 1,000 guys in the base medrash, all clearing, same volume, more Jews, same volume, more Jews. And everyone's arguing about this bottle of punch, right?
This commercial was made for the Second Republic, dude.
It's made for the Secular Republic in Israel. It's a fantastic commercial. It's a fantastic commercial. It ends with same price, more Jews. Same price, more Jews.
It's like that beer commercial with the football players, going back and forth. It's better tasting or it's lighter.
Right, right. Exactly. Right.
So the handkerchief has to be yours.
It has to belong to the person who's giving it to the relinquisher of his rights.
So if you forget the handkerchief and you use the shoes, that's not good.
Well, or unless you make a kinyan on it, unless you acquire it first.
So
Yeah.
even though you use a suitor, that's not Kenyan suitor, it's Kenyan Alipin with a handkerchief?
Well, kinyan sudar and kinyan chalipin are synonymous. The exact same thing. Okay, we'll hold it here for today. Have a wonderful Shabbos. We'll see you for the first time in a long time for a regular week, a regular 5-day week.
Yeah.
It's a